The next item of business is a debate on motion 24395 in the name of Ivan McKee on Local Government Finance Scotland Order 2021 draft. I invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Ivan McKee to speak to and move the motion. Minister, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, the purpose of today's debate on the Local Government Finance Order is to seek Parliament's approval to the guaranteed allocations of revenue funding to individual local authorities for 2021-22. It also seeks agreement to the allocation of additional funding for 2020-21, which has been identified since the 2020 order was approved around this time last year. Although not included in today's order, I would like to take this opportunity to announce that an additional £40 million of general revenue funding will be allocated to local authorities in 2021-22. Councils will have complete autonomy to allocate this extra money based on the local needs and priorities in their own communities. The distribution will be discussed and agreed with COSLA, and local authorities will be notified of their share as soon as possible. Returning to today's order, Presiding Officer, under the most challenging of circumstances, the 2021-22 budget delivers a fair settlement for local government, including the additional £40 million of general uplift. The settlement now provides an additional £375.6 million for vital day-to-day services, an increase of 3.5%, and a further £259 million of non-recurring COVID-19 consequentials that local authorities will have complete autonomy to allocate based on the specific needs and priorities in their communities. This builds on the 2020-21 pre-COVID-19 local government finance settlement that provided an increase in local government day-to-day spending of £589.4 million, or 5.8% compared with the previous year. In 2021-22, the Scottish Government will provide councils with a total core funding package worth almost £11.7 billion. This includes revenue funding of almost £11.1 billion and support for capital expenditure of over £600 million. In addition, councils will also receive a further £259 million of non-recurring COVID-19 support. It is important to note that the total of this funding package is no longer up for debate following the passing of the Scottish Budget Bill last week. Today's debate seeks Parliament's approval for the distribution of this approved total funding to individual local authorities. The order seeks approval for the distribution and payment of £10.4 billion out of the revenue total of £11.3 billion, with the balance mainly made up of specific grant funding which is administered separately. This £10.4 billion is the combination of general grant revenue of almost £8.1 billion, the distributable amount of non-domestic rates income, which has been set at almost £2.1 billion, plus £259 million of non-recurring COVID-19 consequentials. Presiding Officer, the settlement not only gives local authorities the resources and the flexibility to respond to the challenges a pandemic has created, but also importantly provides continued fiscal certainty that doesn't exist in England through our policy of guaranteeing the combined general revenue grant plus non-domestic rates funding set out in this order. This means that any loss of non-domestic rates income resulting from the impact of Brexit or COVID-19 will be compensated for by increased general revenue grant, unlike the position for councils in England, effectively underwriting this critically important revenue stream. As approved as part of the Scottish Budget, the overall funding package for 2021-22 includes £134.8 million of general uplift for vital local services, £59 million revenue to support the final tranche of increased funding for the expansion and funded early learning and childcare entitlement to 1,140 hours, £90 million to compensate councils for choosing to freeze council tax levels. In addition to the £100 million available this year, a further £72.6 million to be transferred from the health portfolio to local authorities in year for investment in health and social care and mental health services that are delegated to integration authorities. This brings the total transfer from the health portfolio to support health and social care integration to £883.6 million in 2021-22. The ongoing £88 million to maintain the pupil-teacher ratio national and secure places for all probationers who require one under the teacher induction scheme. Continued provision of in support for teachers' pay, £156 million, and pensions, £97 million. An additional £7.7 million of support for inter-island ferries, bringing the total to £19.2 million. £5.3 million for Bartlett implementation costs, and £10 million additional capital funding for flood risk schemes, and £12 million for maintenance of local bridges. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government included £90 million in the local government finance settlement to compensate local authorities should they choose to freeze their council tax at 2020-21 levels. All local authorities have now taken the decision to freeze council tax levels, helping to provide stability and certainty at a time when so many households in our communities are under financial pressure. As part of securing support for this year's budget bill, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance confirmed that the £90 million to fund the council tax freeze will be baseline for future years, protecting vital local services and providing assurance for households that they will not be affected by higher increases in future years. There remains a further £115 million of revenue funding that will be distributed once the necessary information becomes available and will be included for approval in the 2022 order. In addition to the revenue funding contained within today's order, there is specific revenue funding that is paid directly by the relevant policy areas under separate legislation, amounting to £775.9 million. Presiding Officer, the 2021 order also seeks approval for £1.3 billion of changes to funding allocations for 2020-21. The full list of changes can be found in the report to the 2021 order. Although all of these sums have been announced previously, this is an unprecedented sum of additional funding to deal with these unprecedented times. The funding includes over £1.2 billion to address COVID-19 pressures, including the additional £275 million announced on the 16th of February and the £200 million for the Lost Income Scheme. Taken together with the additional £259 million allocated next year and the additional fiscal flexibilities announced on the 8th of October, this brings the value of the overall COVID-19 support package for councils up to almost £2.1 billion. In summary, Presiding Officer, the total funding from the Scottish Government to local government next year amounts to almost £11.7 billion. The funding proposals reflect the key role that local government will play as we focus on how we rebuild and renew our communities. The Scottish Government will continue to work in partnership with local government to improve outcomes through first-class public services as we move towards a healthier, greener and fairer society. Presiding Officer, I now move that Parliament approves the Local Government Finance Scotland Order for 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I now call on Bill Bowman to open the Conservatives, and this is Mr Bowman's final speech. Mr Bowman.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This is my last speech here, and I would like to say a few words about my time in the Parliament. I joined the Parliament following a sad event, the untimely passing of Alec Johnson. I leave the Parliament following the untimely passing of my wife Helen last October. It's been an honour and a privilege to serve here, but I will always have bittersweet memories due to these two events. When I came to this chamber, I was surprised and disappointed that not enough attention was paid by government to parts of my regional constituency, such as Dundee and Scotland's fourth largest city, and Angus, the people of which sometimes feel they get only scraps from Hollywood's table. So I've done my best to represent these people in this place, and this was only made possible on the back of a strong Conservative vote. It has been my privilege to raise issues from constituents that have hopefully led to real change for some people. I'm sure all my colleagues will agree that casework runs the gamut from the everyday to vast multi-agency efforts, which take months to resolve if they can be at all. Some things I'm proud to have raised, limited only by my recollection and the time available, would be issues surrounding the do not resuscitate notices and end-of-life care for people during the pandemic. Hospital parking, which is still not resolved in Dundee despite many claims to the contrary. Difficulties faced by eroding general practice across my region and centralisation of local services. A child and adult mental health crisis that emerged long before COVID-19. Various wrong-headed moves by Dundee Council, including the so-called shower tax, if you could believe that, and cuts to municipal swimming lessons. And also pressing Angus Council to keep its recycling centres open. An advocate for pensioners and understanding of funeral costs for families who may not be able to rely on savings that some take for granted. I'm working to make the Scottish Government treat spiralling drug deaths as an emergency. Now, I count this as a positive, but it fills me with sorrow to do so. In my 5 years in the Parliament, I served first on the Economy Committee under convenership of my colleague Gordon Lyndhurst. I then moved to the Public Audit Committee, convened by Jenny Mara, who with stand-in parts for Jackie Bailey and Anna Sarwar when she was on maternity leave. I also served as Vice-Convener of the Scottish Commission for Public Audit, a body that is probably not so well known to many. It is the Parliament's link to Audit Scotland and gave me an interesting insight into how the body that carries out the Auditor General's work functions. Finally, I was appointed Convener of the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee. This is a body that is not a headline grabber, but fulfills a vital function by looking at all the powers delegated in a bill to ministers to ensure that where strong powers are delegated, strong scrutiny by the Parliament is included. It does so not by telling others what to do, but by influencing by suggestion. It brought about important changes to the recent COVID legislation, and I encourage my successor, whoever that is, to continue the consensual approach that has been so successful up till now. Having mentioned my work in the Parliament, I should mention, of course, since you are in the chair, a Deputy Presiding Officer, that I also was on the committee chaired by you for the Solicitors of the Supreme Court Private Members Bill, which I found very interesting, actually, but anyway. Maybe not everyone did. I see John Mason is here as well. Yes, I must say getting out and about in the North East region to visit organisations and meet constituents was a very rewarding aspect of the job, particularly when you can help them with the issues they raise. And unfortunately, these issues tend to involve health boards or councils. And unfortunately, it can take a member's involvement to find a resolution. But I think that's another issue now for others to resolve. I have to say that the Parliament these days is nothing like the one I joined. The pandemic has virtually emptied this place. I'm concerned how new members will take to the system if it remains so slimmed down. I'm sure this is being considered by the parliamentary authorities, but it does mean that those existing members who return will have, in my view, an even greater obligation to help bring new members on board in the much more virtual Parliament of these days. I, of course, want to say thank you to all the staff I have worked with, my own staff here in Holyrood, my constituency staff, the staff in the Parliament, both looking after our facilities and security, and those working with us in committees and in the Chamber. Thank you. So just to say something briefly then about the topic of the debate, and to say that we will, although disappointed in the settlement, will be supporting it. Last week with the Scottish Budget, the SNP had the chance to put Scotland's recovery first. However, unsurprisingly, they chose to prioritise another independence referendum. They had the chance to agree a fair funding deal for cash-strapped councils, awarding them a set proportion of the Scottish Government budget, which was one of the Scottish Conservative demands. Instead, Scottish councils are set to receive a finance settlement uplift of less than, I think, about 1.5% in 2021-22. Of course. How could I resist
Minister?
one last chance to be corrected by you?
Minister, please, yes.
The member does realise, of course, that the proposal from the Conservatives to give local government a fixed percentage of the budget would not only have meant that health spending would have been significantly reduced, in particular during the current COVID pandemic, but also meant that in certain years local government's increase would actually have been lower than it has been.
Mr Bowman.
Well, thank you for that. I don't realise that, no, but thank you for letting me know. The SNP's government's total budget has risen to £44.1 billion in 2021-22, in comparison to the total budget for local government rising to £11.6 billion, I think, in 2021-22. Furthermore, the amount of money the government gives to local authorities has fallen by about £270 million in real terms since 2013-14. This is despite the SNP's government budget from the UK government increasing by more than £1 billion during the same period. Local councils have been betrayed, and you have voted against our plans to create a Barnett-style formula to ensure Scotland's councils get a fair share of the Scottish Government's budget each year, giving them greater certainty and the ability to plan ahead. As a result of the pandemic, Scottish councils are facing a serious budget shortfall despite the promise of some extra funding from the SNP. Concerns around the settlement remain. You have failed to heed the warnings of the Scottish Conservatives or COSLA, and as such have failed to produce a fair funding deal for the cash-strapped councils across Scotland. Now, despite these funding issues and the critical and challenging operating environment of the past year, key workers across all of Scotland's councils have continued to carry out their jobs. I would like to put on record the gratitude of the Scottish Conservatives to local authorities, key workers, who have continued to carry out their work during these very challenging times. Presiding Officer, it has been an honour to serve as an MSP during this session of Parliament and to give my last speech before I stand down. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Bourne. I'm thrilled that you mentioned the solicitors and the Supreme Court Committee, a highlight for both of us. I now call on Pauline McNeill, please, to open for Labour.
Thank you. May I offer my very best wishes to Bill Bowman in his retirement from this place. Yet again, local authorities have a settlement that does not meet their needs. And if you don't believe me, believe the motion drafted by COSLA leaders last Friday. Leaders expressed their deep disappointment with the final local government settlement and note that the increase in public pay sector policy with no additional funding for local government and the reprofiling of capital funding for town centres, bridge maintenance over 2 years instead of the total being available to 21-22, the financial position of local government has effectively worsened compared with the publication of the initial draft budget. COSLA leaders in the last few days have already asked for a meeting with Cabinet Secretary and Ministers to discuss what they believe is a gap in public sector pay policy, and I hope that the Minister could confirm in closing whether you are going to agree to meet COSLA leaders over this concerning gap in pay policy. Since they came to power, the SNP have moved continually over the past 8 years to centralise control of local government budgets and the cumulative underfunding of local government. But we do need a reset of the relationship between central government and the councils and recognising this cumulative effect over many years. We must push powers down to councils and allow local authorities who are best placed to decide local priorities. And the SNP government presided over more than a decade of chronic underfunding of our councils. In fact, local authorities have faced real-term cuts to their core funding, approaching £1 billion over an 8-year period. And this has had a direct effect on councils' ability to continue to provide essential services and protect public sector jobs. Scottish local authorities also face a squeeze on capital resources from the government, a reduction in the capital budget. I think extremely worrying. More worrying is that it's set to worsen because there's no increases planned for the next 5 years, which does represent a real cut to capital income. I do find that quite astonishing. So let's be clear, less capital funding means less investment in key infrastructure such as schools, housing, community renewal and roads. And for the general public, that means their potholes are not going to be filled. The Scottish Government must leave councils in a financial position to help communities get back on their feet as we emerge from the pandemic. Local authorities have provided vital services throughout this national crisis, distributing financial support to families and businesses in need. The COSLA asked for £770 million additional funding for the year 21-22 to deal with COVID, based on local government expenses from last year. The Scottish Government has announced less than half of that, that's £259 million, flexible funding. The COVID shortfall against the COSLA ask is a staggering £511 million. Social care workers have risked exposure to COVID every day for over a year to care for people who depend on their support. It's time to give them well above the wage that they earn now, and Scottish Labour had called on the Government during the budget to consider a £12 an hour increase, or £12 an hour baseline, proceeding to £15 in the next Parliament, which we think would be transformational in how we value our care workers. We do welcome the Cabinet Secretary's concession to increase funding allocation for local authorities last week. However, set against more than a decade of underfunding, £90 million is a drop in the ocean. Going forward, local authorities need consistent, adequate funding so they can pay for local services. Local government must have a fiscal framework which ensures their ability for long-term financial planning. This framework must include both capital and revenue spend. The detail of the framework should be determined through discussions between the Scottish Government and local authorities. However, this is urgently needed now, a reset of that relationship. It's because of the general direction of the Scottish Government's funding policy to local government and the long-term implications of continuing to underfund the revenue and the capital budget. It means that Scottish Labour will not be voting for this order tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms McNeill. I now call Patrick Harvey to open the Green Party. Mr Harvey, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also congratulate Bill Bowman on his final speech and wish him well for the future? And can I ask your forgiveness, Presiding Officer, as we're overrunning slightly. I may need to leave the chamber a few minutes before the end of the debate in order to reach home in time to connect to decision time.
You put that so sweetly, I feel I must accept.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer. Inevitably, in these debates, there are those who ask for perfection and those who defend imperfection as though there is no imperfection. The reality is that this local government finance order, as several others in recent years, is some significant way short of perfect, but progress has been made. And as we can see, the general uplift is significantly higher than the non-recurring COVID expenditure given to local government, and so that does need to be recognised. Taken together, the additional funding that was announced before the budget and the extra 40 million that the Minister mentioned in his speech, I think the gap, certainly in terms of the impact of the local government pay settlement that's going to have to be negotiated, has been closed somewhat. And so I think it's very important that we pass the order in order to make sure that local government has access to the funds that need to be provided to it. I want to say something about the future, though, because even before the pandemic, this session of Parliament has been another period of failure, collectively, from all of us, to reform a broken system of local government finance. The Greens made serious efforts to try and improve this, to try and move the issue forward, after so many elections where people promised, including parties that won and became the government, promised reform of local government finance, promised a replacement for the council tax. We tried to get progress. We tried to bring people around the table to begin to get progress. If it had not been for the pandemic, we would be expecting the publication of a draft bill for consideration in the next Parliament as a result of those cross-party talks. The pandemic, of course, stalled all of that. The next session of Parliament, as the Finance Committee's report and the budget makes clear, is going to have to take on a deep re-examination of the whole of Scottish tax policy. We're going to have to look, as the committee's report at paragraph 177 says, at the breadth and nature of the tax base, the impact of economic activity on the size of the tax base, and the relationship between local, Scottish and UK-wide taxes. If we're serious about having tax policy that is going to both support services, including services at a local level and local autonomy within that, and help develop a fairer, more equal and sustainable economy in Scotland, it is not going to be good enough to have yet another session of the Scottish Parliament where we fail to grapple the admittedly difficult but urgent issue of local government tax reform. It should be every bit as unacceptable that local government simply has to wait and have a handout from central Scottish government, every bit as unacceptable as if the Scottish government still had to just wait and hear whatever it gets in a grant from the UK government. At least back in the days of a single simplistic block grant, there was a framework that said how that block grant should be calculated. Now we're in a much more complex scenario with a wider range of taxes available to us in Scotland. We should be pushing that fiscal power down the chain to the local government level as well. And if that is something that the next session of the Scottish Parliament could take on, it will be long overdue. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr Harvey, and you kept within your time. I call Willie Rennie to open for the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you,
Rennie.
Deputy Presiding Officer. I knew Bill Bowman's wife, Helen. She was a kind and generous woman, certainly formidable for anybody who met her. I met her as one of my constituents, and I was truly sad that when she passed. And I do wish Bill well in the future. I'm sure he'll continue to make good use of the services of his MSP in his retirement. But he can know he can retire from this place, knowing that he did his bit in service of his country. So I do wish Bill well for the future. I also want to praise local government staff. They have done an exceptional job during this pandemic. They went above and beyond, spent extra hours all weekend, usual extra shifts, to make sure that money was got out the door for businesses and services were provided when people needed them. And I think we should all recognise that service. We'll be voting for the order this afternoon because we supported the budget with the additional £300 million of extra support for mental health, education, business support, training for the North East, councils funding as well as climate. Some of that money is reflected in the order today, which the Minister has already set out, including the £259 million for non-recurring COVID consequentials and £375.6 million, and of course the £40 million that he was referring to as well. So we will support that because it's important that councils get that funding for the Pupil Equity Fund supplement, the bounce back support for education and schools, but also the £90 million in future years for the baseline for council funding. That's important that that is supported as well. I was pleased to see additional support for councils like Aberdeenshire, Aberdeen, as well as Edinburgh, Orkney and Shetland. I presume Orkney and Shetland, in part because the additional funding that's been made available for the internal ferry service is something that my colleagues Tavish Scott, Beatrice Wishart and also Liam MacArthur have been advocating for some time. But I was also pleased to see that all the councils were above the 85% floor, which is the first time that that's been achieved for some years. So it means I don't have to give my usual speech berating the government for failing to meet that threshold. But I'm pleased that it's met because the North East councils were underfunded for a number of years and that floor did not protect them. We've also secured within the budget additional training support for the North East as part of the transition from oil and gas of £15 million, and partly to reflect the fact that that part of the country has not been adequately supported. I'm not as optimistic as Patrick Harvie clearly was about the ability of the council tax reform group to actually achieve its goals. All you had to do was look at the face, and it was a picture of relief from the Minister's predecessor when that group had to be cancelled because of the pandemic. I don't believe the government had any intention of reforming the council tax, and we're only too happy for the group to be abandoned. But there is an opportunity in the next Parliament to make that change, because council tax does need to be reformed. It needs to be fairer. It needs to provide the extra levers and dynamics to make sure that we raise the appropriate money, but we give councils the responsibility for raising the majority of the money that they spend. We would support some form of land value taxation as part of that, but we need to make sure that we progress on that and we don't let whoever is in government next time round off the hook with that. One final plea, in fact, I won't make the final plea because I am going to conclude my speech on the dot. Thank you very much.
If you want to make a final plea that's brief, be my guest.
No, I wouldn't want to encourage
You're content. That's wonderful. I now call on Ivan Key, Minister, to close the debate, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thanks to everybody who took part in this, although very short debate. I'd like to open up by thanking Bill Bowman for his time in the Parliament and wish him all the best in the future. And also take the opportunity to thank local government and their staff for the tremendous efforts they have made through this very difficult and challenging times. And it's right that we're here to vote for the order that gives them the finance that they need and deserve. Just to pick up on the point that Pauline McNeill asked, the letter from COSLA is under active consideration by the CABSIC Finance, and she'll respond on those matters shortly. So, Presiding Officer, the 2021 Local Government Finance Order before us today seeking parliamentary approval to the guaranteed payment of £10.4 billion in revenue support to be paid to Scotland's 32 local authorities to enable them to provide the people of Scotland with a full range of services and support they expect and deserve. And although today's order distributes £10.4 billion, this is not the whole story, as this does not cover the £775 million of specific revenue grants, which include funding for expansion of early learning and childcare, criminal justice, pupil equity funding and additional support for ferries and Gaelic. This represents real money for vital local services and should not be discounted when trying to make funding comparisons. This means that next year the Scottish Government will provide local authorities with a total funding package worth almost £11.7 billion, delivering an increase of £375 million or 3.5%. for vital day-to-day services. There's also further Scottish Government support of £650 million paid out with the local government finance settlement, including the Attainment Scotland Fund, Schools for the Future programme and City Deals, and is paid to local authorities, bringing the Scottish Government's total investment to over £12.3 billion. This investment in public services underpins the Scottish Government's commitment to support our young people to fulfil their potential and to ensure that the people of Scotland get the right care and support in the right place and at the right time. In partnership with local government, the Scottish Government will continue to deal with the current crisis and, more importantly, recover from this as quickly and as efficiently as possible. I do need to remind opposition members that failure to approve this order would result in Scotland's local authorities and, as a consequence, all of our local communities being deprived of almost £2 billion additional Scottish Government investment, including £1.5 billion to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and £375 million for vital day-to-day services. And on that final note, Presiding Officer, I encourage the Parliament to support the local government finance order before us in Parliament today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. That concludes the debate on Local Government Finance Scotland Order 2021 draft. It's time to move on to the next item of business, and I'll have a short pause as I wait for ministers to take their places.